So, a very warm welcome to all of you here on this warm summer day for a discussion on the future of work and education. Obviously, something that will have an impact to all of us. And I am very, very happy that we are sitting here together with a group of people who have not only thought about this for some time now, but also come up with some thoughts and suggestions that I think will bring us further. Not only this afternoon, but also in the coming weeks and months and years. So, see here behind me a presentation that will a bit go with us through this talk. The talk is rather short. We have 1 hour, 10 minutes. So I won't take too much of our time. Just maybe quickly tell you that there is something at stake as I learn from reading the texts from my colleagues sitting here with me in relation to work and education and its future, because this is the hypothesis of this panel. We live in a time of a radical change, of a radical transformation, a transformation of industry that is called in this context transformation of industry 4.0, a transformation of industry that will change our lives. Will change our lives in relation to labor and has to change our lives. I think this is the hypothesis in relation to education. So if we learn that the transformation of industry 4.0 is also a transformation of labor, there has to be an answer that understands that it will not only destroy labor, but also create new labor. This answer is an answer related to education. And about this, we will discuss today. The context in which all these thoughts have been brought forward is a very interesting book series that already has published 3 books, and a book number 4 with a very similar title, The Future of Work and Education, will come soon, will come in autumn. So when we talk today, there's already a lot that has been thought and written. Other books in the context of this book series that actually is called ARIS, Arts, Research, Innovation and Society, have been on other topics relating to this future that is coming anyways. One on the relation between research and art, and the other one on the future of museums. Now, of course, we are all looking forward to a book that will give us insights in this question of the future of work and education. Today, I have the chance to speak with 3 people who are also part of this project. And of course, the first person I would like to very quickly mention in this context is someone we all know, because he's the rector of the University of Applied Arts, of the Angewandte here, and it is Gerald Bast. Gerald Bast, you will see, speaks about a revolution that is in the moment shaping our lives, and that has also to be translated in a revolution of education. Beside that, I am very happy that Elias G. Carayannis joined us today. He's professor at the George Washington University, and he will start after my short presentation with an input where he will kind of give us insights or introduce us in the topic we talk about today. Brigitte Felderer is the head of social design here at the University of Applied Arts, and a very important curator and thinker here in Vienna. And David Campbell is an important figure in the whole project. Without you, I would not know what to say today. David Campbell is lecturer here at the University of Applied Arts and at many other institutions as well. I don't want to take too much of your time, so I think we all are looking forward to hear Elias and his short introduction.
Thank you. Is the mic on? Yes. Okay. Alors, merci bien pour votre introduction. I said, as the lady introducing us today is so fluent in French, I joked about this. Vielen Dank für Ihre Zeit und die Gelegenheit, hier miteinander zu sprechen über Fragen, die sehr wichtig sind. Wir sind alle Bürger demokratischen Gesellschaften, hoffentlich. Okay? So, excuse my German. Thank you for your kindness. I remember of a phrase that a former American president, during a time that he was actually the office and the person was very much beloved, he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner," okay? So I will not say "Ich bin ein Wiener" today, but I would like to continue with some thoughts about what are our issues that we may take into consideration. If you notice the title, it's Industry 5.0 to 6.0. It's getting beyond the existing paradigm that is much more machine-centric than it should be, I think, from which a lot of questions emanate as to the future of work and labor and the future of education in our book, among other works in this field. So hopefully coping with today in pursuit of a better tomorrow. Before I go forward, of course, I wish to thank Rector Bast and my friend and colleague, David Campbell, that I have been working with both for some time now on this and other projects. So here's some provocative questions, especially in a day like today. What climate change, right? Who needs democracy? Why should the arts matter? Should robots have rights? Should people matter more than machines? These are implicit questions, whether we want to deal with them as a sort of a entertaining or provocative subject or something that we actually really need to start tackling. And I will go quickly through some other slides just to give some context in the discussion that will follow, hopefully. What we have today is the presence of networks everywhere, open standards, new business designs. And this means that we have things changing in a way that is very dramatic. The challenge and the opportunity, and I'm quoting or paraphrasing from Ilya Prigozhin here, Nobel Prize winning physicist, who wrote a book, From Being to Becoming. And here we're talking about from socioeconomic being to techno-economic becoming. The implicit question here is whether and how we could sustainably move from natural scarcity to artificial abundance, not the other way around. And we have both trends fighting with each other right now. This is about innovation, and everybody talks about open innovation. I will simply show here very quickly the underlying activities, because these are areas where art and the creative endeavor and thinking, as I like to say, not just outside but beyond the box, comes into play and place. Creativity and inventiveness drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and hopefully sustainable development. Now, innovation is a challenge. It's a Sisyphean effort. Everybody thinks something will not work until it does, opposes it until it proves itself, and thinks that it's not a good idea until it shows that it is otherwise. So we need to remember that at the same time, this imagination is even more important, as Einstein said, and I think we would not disagree. Our work, the work I do with, it's at the heart of the Iris book series, the work I've done with David Campbell and others over the years, this construct we call the Quadruple Helix. This is about looking at the pillars of society and economy today, the top-down government, university, industry, but also including and emphasizing the presence and role of the civil society, because that's what differentiates autocracies from democracies. This is a major chasm right now, a fault line, a front line also, both a fault line and a front line. Between autocracies and democracies, we have democracies that are trying to become autocracies, and autocracies that are trying to prove themselves more correct than democracies. Until recently, we had a very different trend. This is important to revisit, and those who believe in this keep fighting for more, not less democracy. Now, the fifth dimension, the climate, the environment, and the climate that is shaped by it and its state of being and becoming. is the fifth dimension. So this is the quintuple helix concept, within which you see government, university, industry, civil society. At the heart of it, there is this smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. And I'm closing with a brief commentary about the different techno-economic paradigms. Industry 4.0, we all know. In fact, just last week in France, there was this introduction, how Europe is trying to emulate the US in ways that are not necessarily as creative and constructive as one might actually prefer, but we'll see, creating a European stealth fighter. The Industry 5.0 is a move, as I said, to a more human-centric, from a more machine-centric paradigm, okay, more balanced. And then beyond that, I won't have you read this, but I will just relate and reflect on what 6.0 could be. If and as we see that Industry 5.0 becomes a reality and in a manner that actually is really about people and not about machines. So if the machines start serving us more rather than the other way around, we may start seeing this revisiting of the Athenian 5th century ideal, so to speak, where we had, of course, at the time, slaves serving people. Hopefully, in this context, machines will serve people, giving them time and opportunity to be more creative and inventive and free. And again, not the other way around, hopefully, people being enslaved by machines. So this is a little a cartoon about artificial intelligence. What is artificial is very clear. What is intelligence, not so. And then, of course, a brief juxtaposition of the different kinds of learning that are the heart of artificial intelligence. We don't have time to go into technicalities today, but the deep learning of AI is what really increasingly emulates and tries to replicate human aware, as I would call it, learning, self-aware. This is both the challenge and the opportunity. And I will close with a quote from someone who wrote about things that we're discussing today. Plato in his Republic had these two quotes about philosophers, kings, and systems, which are very pertinent and relevant. So our politicians need to be both philosophers and kings nowadays. This sounds almost like an oxymoron, but I remain optimistic. And I finish with the, perhaps, the language of the future, or maybe not. This is a representation of the Chinese fleet that in the 15th century ventured out, some say all the way up to Africa, to try and discover and perhaps conquer the world for the Middle Kingdom at the time. Nowadays, I go back to my native country of Greece, and I see these huge moving islands, the ships that bring in the Chinese goods, part of the Belt and Road initiative. So we all live in interesting times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. After this introduction, we are in the middle of our topic, and
yes, thank you. Yes. Thank you.
So, we are now, I propose that we continue now, we hear everyone here on the panel, and at the end, you can all come up with questions, statements in relation to what we have heard. The first person I would like to relate to is Gerald Bast, very, very much within what we just have heard. You say that in the future, not knowledge as such, but creativity and the ability to connect and to apply knowledge will be what will matter so decisively. And actually, even more clear, you say that along the fourth industrial revolution, fueled by the recent technological revolution, we need an educational revolution. This is something amazing to be said by the head of an educational institution. So we need an educational revolution, and this revolution has to be a revolution driven by creativity and social intelligence. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I didn't make too many friends in the academic area when I said this, and I regularly say this, that we need this educational revolution, and this will also have to be a revolution at the level of universities. We will need total different universities in the next 20 years. And a lot of my colleagues always under change, they understand a lot more money for more of the same. And I say we need a lot more money, but for totally different things. And you mentioned it. If we face a situation, a society driven by technology which is going into the domains of what for centuries people, humankind, meant to be the domain of humans. Artificial intelligence, we saw that, we heard that. These machines, these robots or artificial intelligence can be connected with a lot of things, will take over a lot of areas humans thought this would be their domain. And so the question is, what will remain in 20, 25 years as a human domain? What will be the mission of mankind in this universe if we have machines who are able to combine, to think in a similar way we did? If we realize the merge of machines with humans. What I say is we have to focus on the core of humanity. We have to focus on what is the essence of human being. And this is not what machines, what robots, what artificial intelligence can do. These are things like intuition. These are things like coping with uncertainty. These are things coping with paradox, with totally weird, seemingly weird combinations. So if we look back in human civilization, it was always the seemingly unthinkable which brought us to the next step. And this is not, at least not yet, what machines can do. And this is what we should focus on. But therefore, we need a totally different education. We now have a system of education mainly driven by giving answers to clear questions. Yes or no, right or wrong, correct, incorrect. This is also the idea which is driving our politics. Yes or no, wrong or right, foreigner or not foreigner. So this will have to change our society and also to change our educational system. I think the future of university will be much more like we have it here, sitting not so much in fixed spaces, we still need, but going out to society and relativizing facts, relativizing data. The future of education and the future of knowledge will not so much be the acquisition of knowledge. We all have a lot of knowledge and data in our pockets, more than we can realize. The real thing and the crucial thing will be how we'll be able to connect data in a meaningful way, in a way which gives us the opportunity to foster democracy and to foster humanity. And this is not the mainstream of our educational system from kindergarten to university. This is my hypothesis.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Yeah, the future comes anyway, but the question is how do we prepare and what is our position? What kind of future do we want? And obviously, if you speak about the revolution, this is also related to the fact that we might not live in the most democratic of all possible societies, even though we have heard that there is a difference between autocracy and democracy. Now, my next question goes to Brigitte Felderer. She is the head of social design here at the University of Applied Arts. And in the social design master's program, questions like social innovation and exactly what we heard, unexpected approaches, unusual results, are very much part of the curriculum, part of what people would do, what you would discuss about. So my question to you would be, I think we have to gain an imagination of another possible democracy. And what would the role of social design be to get this imagination?
Thank you very much for this. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much for this nice question, because I think it's perfectly relating back what has been said already. And also mentioned in the keynote, and I think if we discuss here the future of education, we speak of a vision, we speak of an imagination, and we do this in the framework of an art university. And I really think we are somehow competent, and we work on being competent in creating a vision. And doing social design, so as we try to develop it and sharpen this discourse, we always come back to a sort of a slogan, not refrain from future, nicht auf Zukunft verzichten. And this slogan is not so much a slogan, actually it's a quote from a very important historical study about the disoccupied, or the danger of getting disoccupied in the 1920s, so in a time of crisis, in a factory. And the researchers, Paul Lazarfeld and Maria Hoder, would come to the result in their survey that the in danger of work is resulting in resignation, because people lose the vision of their future, of their personal future. And if you lose the vision and the imagination of a productive future, the sense of life gets lost. Your identification of with what you are doing gets completely lost. And I think this is one point. We have to create a very strong and, of course, critical vision and imagination of democracy, or of a society we create and we want to live in. And when you say head of department, it sounds like a hierarchy. And this is another point in this social design department, and we are somehow, I think, the lived experiment, or the illustration of what Rector Bast was pointing out, in terms of that the universities have to change, because we work on an exemplary and very new and fresh and unconventional, in the very best sense, unconventional curriculum. We are really free to develop the projects. We work on a very collegial base, students and teachers, teachers and students. We keep it as open as possible, who is learning what by whom. And I think I also see the productivity of that, and I can somehow reconfirm this approach. And what makes it not easy is because the students coming to the course, starting with social design, they always want to know, what is it? How do we define social design? And the subtitle is Arts as Urban Innovation. So how would we define innovation? And I think it's very important not to give the answer. And it's very difficult not to give the answer, because as soon as we would make a definition, as soon as we would cast it into concrete, we get old. We would age immediately from this second on. And I'm very proud, because here's one of our colleague, Raphael, is sitting here, and he's a representative, he's studying social design, and he's a representative of the School of Questionism. And so it's a sort of a school within the school, and they say, okay, over with solutionism, it should or the question is missed the point. And I think you only can question if you're really interested to get an answer. And an answer is somehow, expecting an answer is you want something. You expect something and you come up with an imagination. I think imagination is a political category.
Thank you very much. I think that you showed us that by questioning, we can also, let's say, see innovation differently. Innovation is not always innovation to the better. The new is not always better. And if we think about the 20s, actually, the new was not always better. But it can be. If we continue to question, it is possible that that we insist and persist in democracy. And this is exactly what brings me to David Campbell, who has 3 hypotheses for the discussion today. One, we have heard it already today, is about the transformation of Industry 4.0 that will destroy labor, but it will also create new labor, we heard. So finally, there even may be more new labor, but under a condition, David says, the condition is that there is a good learning. Then he has a second hypothesis, that is, artificial intelligence will not replace human intelligence, but artificial intelligence will complement human intelligence under a condition, which is that there is a good learning. And hypothesis number 3, democracy and quality of democracy can act as innovation enabler for Industry 4.0 and democracy 4.0 under a condition, you know it already, if there is a good learning. So, David, please tell us more about this promise of a good learning, of democracy 4.0, and help us to understand what is actually a good learning.
Well, I just realized when you were reading those 3 hypotheses, these are almost too many hypotheses for a short statement. Well, maybe the road I would take, and I think this refers to several of the statements before, one can say that advanced knowledge is something like a very much a diversified knowledge on the one hand, but then there's also a need to actually combine, network, and integrate those different types of knowledge. This is in fact also very much an area where innovation comes in, and I think this also expresses very much why there's this need of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches to knowledge production and innovation, in a sense of really trying to move on. When we in fact go to the first hypothesis about labor, we could say, well, what types of labor should be designed, implemented, and fostered, which do not that easily cannot that easily become victim of something like automatization processes. And I think it would be types of jobs and professionalism that again actually try to combine these very different types of competences and knowledges, which of course then bridges back to the educational system, meaning that a pure focus on disciplinary knowledge will not be sufficient anymore in the future. You have to combine, in that sense, the vertical disciplinary knowledge with these horizontal lines of interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary combination. And so we could figure out which types of jobs machines would be least good at performing, and probably it's exactly these combinations. And we could go forward basically saying, I mean, theoretically, there are no 2 types of competences as far away as they may be, which not could be integrated in a meaningful way. Artificial intelligence, of course, is a complicated issue again. We had, in fact, Nora and I, a joke when we were sitting here to say, well, with one hand we're holding the microphone, with another hand we're holding the paper. We would need a third or fourth hand for taking notes, so maybe it wouldn't be bad to have artificial hands in that sense. Another paradox probably is with artificial intelligence that even though artificial intelligence is progressing in a technological sense, we still have those fundamental discourses, what is actually intelligence, okay? It's not really settled and there are different opinions. Maybe if you want to be optimistic, we could say And if we compare artificial intelligence with human intelligence, so maybe human intelligence is creating an ecosystem around itself with those artificial intelligences, which hopefully will serve human intelligence. And I think one area, of course, where artificial intelligence can serve a human intelligence is on the one hand in reproducing, let's say, certain data and databases, but at the same time, of course, on focusing how actually those linkages in that sense could be supported, yes? So in that sense, again, I think we should also think of artificial intelligence as something that should support us in the future in the way how we design, implement, and proceed with work. And then finally, if we come to democracy, perhaps in an optimistic sense, we could try to put up something like an analogy to say, well, if advanced democracy is being characterized by something like a pluralism in a political sense, does this pluralism equate or correspond with diversity of something like advanced knowledge? So we want to think that in that sense there is some kind of a co-evolution, because how can you have diversified knowledge with a very centralized or mainstreamed political strictness? Yes? I think in that sense it's obvious that moving forward in terms of knowledge and innovation also, of course, requires this democratic openness. Of course, in a practical sense, the many debates which we have currently out there, in the sense, is democracy needed for further development? So if you compare on socioeconomic terms, countries, China with India, China less democratic, but of course socioeconomically advanced, India more democratic, perhaps not so much socioeconomically advanced. So in empirical terms, of course, we are being questions of this very much. But maybe as a last note on this, in a certain sense, perhaps we could even shift this and say, well, maybe the performance of autocratic regimes, in a certain sense, is being overestimated, yes? In the sense that autocratic regimes, of course, also benefit from this openness of knowledge production and innovation, which we have in those more liberal countries. So I would say, in that sense, as a further provocation, I believe that at the beginning of the 21st centuries, those autocratic regimes, in a socioeconomic sense, would not have developed that far if we wouldn't have those more democratic countries and regimes, etc., which in that sense have invested in allowing this or nurturing this diversity of knowledge and innovation. Yes? But in a certain sense, this, of course, is also a hope and a wish, yes? Maybe in the sense of, testing this empirically, of course, there's enough space to have here very controversial thoughts and moving backward and forward. Hmm?
Thank you very much. From now on, whenever you have a question, please come up with it. We are very open to discuss. If you have no question, I will have many. But in case you have something to say, please. Yeah.
Yes.
It's not a question, but I think listening and also seeing the models. But you mentioned social intelligence, and I think what we also do in the framework of social design is, of course, keeping an eye on the big picture. But it's all the projects in the end are also about micropolitics, about very little steps. The social intelligence is sometimes very individually based, or something created in a small group of people, but we still were very convinced that this has impact and it's worthwhile investing because it's creating future, and it will change perception, it will change democratic wishes and reflection. And I think it's very important also to mention the micro-political importance in the big picture.
I absolutely agree, but again, for being able to construct such a society with a different way of politics and micropolitics, you again need to have a different mindset based on a different education. And if you look around here in this wonderful university, you see the effect of people who are able to work with unpredictability, to work with paradox, to work with contradiction, to work with putting questions. And this is what we need not only in the world of the arts, but in the whole society. And it is starting. So I'm an optimistic person. If we look now what is happening all over Europe, that young people at the age of 13, 14, 15 are going on the street and putting relevant questions. And by doing so, they are scaring the established politicians. They are scaring the established people from society, in school systems and in the parliament. This is the beginning of a change. And sometimes I have a dream, and this would be, maybe you will give an idea on this, having Greek, you mentioned it, Greek background. We all heard about the origin of democracy in ancient Greece. And this was a system where the civic society, at that time only men, was mainly dedicated to doing things which we would say this is a pleasure. Putting the emphasis on philosophy, art, sports, contributing on the progress of society. So what about thinking such a society where people are able to concentrate on talking to each other, mainly focusing on living with other people, communicating on what should be the future of society, concentrating on the arts, on philosophy, on what should be economy, how should develop our social situation. In the ancient system, this was possible. It was only possible because they had slaves who did at that time they said lower basis of work. Yeah. Could we imagine a society where people are able to concentrate on these wonderful things, supported by machines? And we have this unique chance now that we have the opportunity to create machines, may it be robots or other things, having kind of an intelligence and supporting us in spending our time in much more human and much more interesting fields. Of course, this is an utopia, and in this I'm a kind of a old-fashioned person because I don't believe in the death of utopias. I think in these times we even more than ever need utopias, and this would be an utopia which would be worth working for. And at that time we have, of course, a lot of question how and what will people living from, and this discussion about the general income will be a question, and the question also will be people able to live with general income and nonetheless being willing to concentrate on these things which are necessary for our societies. But then we just have, you mentioned it, have to read Marie Jahoda from the 1930s, and she clearly said it is necessary to have some mission. It is necessary psychologically to have something to do which is meaningful. And this combination, a general income with some mission for the individual which is meaningful for society and for societal progress, this in my concept is the future of society. And of course this is necessary Therefore, it's necessary a change of education again. All these qualifications, our people here, yeah, that is, our people working here in these universities, this will not only be necessary for artists, but for the whole society. And we will have to introduce this change, like there was a change in the 1970s and 80s when people with quantitative methods, with statistics, took over large parts of economy, psychology, society, politics. I predict that in 20 years, people with the skills of creativity will take over the society, and no police will stop us.
Yeah, this brings me back, of course, to the economist. I mean, we hear the police, but we have to dream. So you told us that societies should exist to serve their citizens and markets to serve societies. Can you maybe, from your perspective, dream a bit about the structural change that would be needed to make this thinkable? How would markets and societies have to change to serve the citizens?
In fact, is the mic on? Yes, okay, thank you. I actually am an engineer first, and then I went into other fields like the economics of innovation. So I like to think in terms of systems and in terms of prototypes. And I'm very much, I think culturally, there's affinity with what you're doing here. What my colleague earlier said about the school of questionism. In fact, I urge my doctoral students and candidates to realize that it's much more important to ask the right questions. And those being non-trivial actually are often impossible to answer than finding answers to questions. And that aligns very much with this approach, I believe. This is about the capacity to envision and imagine. So yes, these sentences envision a future that actually will reflect more what Rector Bast actually described earlier, in a sense recreating the golden century of ancient Greece. But in that context, we need to remember, reflect, realize, and review carefully the implications. First of all, the word and the meaning of the word aristocracy. It became something rather pejorative, and for good reasons, over the centuries. But when Plato and Aristotle talked about aristocracy, they meant the regime where merit mattered. The aristi were those that really were expected and presumed to be excellent in terms of character, competence, charisma, and they were able and willing to serve as leaders. This has nothing to do with the populist distortions of the concept, and this is important to understand because it relates with the need to deal with what the basic human rights are today, the significance of high-quality education for all, because I mention here the human and intellectual capital assets of Europe. Universities are the primary pillar and driver of smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. And of course, both health and education are very fundamental in a practical sense, human rights, if you agree that the people are really your most valuable assets. If you don't just pay lip service to it. This is not about politics. So we really need to get to a point where this is not about one or another political perspective on the matter, but really understand where and how there is opportunity, and perhaps the younger people and citizens among us, and this is the other aspect of democracy, where everybody has engagement, responsibility, and involvement in the common issues and the common causes and common challenges and opportunities. In democracy, everybody should be involved. The younger people perhaps are showing us the way in that regard to get to a point where we get beyond the politics and into the substance. And in my own adopted country, the United States, there is a very interesting dialogue and dynamic right now going into next year's elections. People have started talking about democratic socialism even. And I don't say that because necessarily I'm a proponent, but actually it is very interesting to see this becoming part of the discourse. It shows a transformation in the ecosystem, political and economic and social. So what I'm really trying to say is that there is, I think, tremendous challenges and opportunities. We can and should envision a different future, which could be much better than not. Technology, to the degree we can understand and master how it interacts and shapes culture and people and how they shape it, can be a major enabler of this. So instead of having people becoming alienated, having more people having an identity, being part of something, remaining individuals, but being part of a community. So this is I think, what is emerging. And clearly, places like yours, this particular university has a tremendous luxury and responsibility, the freedom to frame their own questions. They are free from discipline in that they're being free to shape new disciplines. So this is what I mean and I think of when I say thinking beyond the box, along design thinking modalities and practices and guidelines. Okay, so let's all try to think beyond the box in a transdisciplinary way, as David mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It sounded, I mean, what we heard sounded already almost like last words, but nevertheless, high education for everyone, and the possibility to discuss, make statements, questions also now. Yeah.
Thank you very much first for giving us the insight on your theories and ideas on future, which we, or at least me, I don't normally know that much about it. I just know some kind of ideas, but it has been a lot about revolution or ideas, how we should do it, but not that much about you're more of an optimistic. I would say I'm more of a pessimist because I'm looking at the place and I don't see the circumstances out of which a real revolution could happen, because it's always some kind of small steps and a big movement. Like in the 60s, people thought now we will change society, and then every time this kind of happens in a generation. So how can we make sure that it doesn't happen this time with a big AI coming?
Let me just tell you, if you have some other questions or remarks, we have to do it now and then answer all. Mm-hmm. Is there other questions, remarks, now that the box of pessimism has been opened? No?
Any
okay.
optimism?
Okay, so then no more chance later to ask or say something. Is it fine for you? No, because we have to finish the discussion. So we now collect everything, and then we will all answer. Is there any questions or remark you want to bring up? Maybe later?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just might like to add. The role of the arts and the methods of art, maybe this is something which could be talked a bit more, like what they could play within this revolution, within this vision, within these new forms of education. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, some doubts, some question about the concrete role of the art. What can we do in order to bring this revolution forward? Are there more questions or remarks? Then I would now ask all of you here on the panel to answer or think about the two questions we got. Let's start with Brigitte Felderer and go this way.
Okay, thank you. First, a box of pessimism. I think it can't be big enough, you know. It's also a good motivation to act. I would never equate pessimism with resignation. And I think the Fridays for Future have been mentioned, and they are very pessimistic messages if you go there. And but they are also the reason to raise. But it's important to analyze, so to say, the pessimism. And so what root does it have? Is it something individual? Can we share it? Couldn't pessimism create networks? Could not pessimism create new friendships? Is not pessimism something which is borderless? And in that sense, for me, pessimism has a lot of innovative power. So thank you for the question. And coming to the role of the arts, the role of the arts, we could speak endless, but I think we have to finish. And it's, of course, it's the key question in the framework here. And what is, for me, the university somehow, especially in these times, is really an exemplary space of free space. And so to say, not commercial space. And I think also the position of the arts is changing with this alternative notion of education, because art is not something which is only positioned in a typical or conventional art frame or art institution. I think the art and I speak here, I speak for one department, but there are many more. And we are not shy of putting art into a field where we cannot count on understanding of art or a particular education of art or count on a knowledge of a certain elite who has a knowledge of art, but art who has also a direct impact, who is creating an immediate atmosphere, who has is communicating something. Also, because I have the historical examples, but we were discussing this morning Otto Neurath, and I think he's an expert in one point, and he's using artistic messages to address a big audience. And I think this is also, it's not the only role of art. And I'm not saying something against an art institution, but for us the challenge is how do we use art, how do we also instrumentalize it in a positive way outside art institutions. And I would say the people are never uninterested in art, it's just to get them. And I think, as we know from the whole avant-garde, with the context, of course the art is changing. And it's always challenging the art, it's challenging the artist, and I think it's a productive challenge. So it's just one answer of many.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to be actually creative and combine the two questions and deal with them because they are related in my mind. Artists are the new kings, should be in my mind, in terms of the concept that I related before of Plato's comments. The artists are the ones who both help us and force us to think beyond the box. In many different countries, we've had, for example, leaders who have been very young, very good looking. They could be actually in some Hollywood movie. They've had an interesting set of values or beliefs. In other countries, they have been reality show personalities. How about if we envisioned actually having artists as leaders? So this is, no, you let me finish, please. So artists could be and should be in many ways leading our thinking beyond the box, our envisioning solutions in the face of challenges. And I by the way, last week I was with one of the Fraunhofers in your neighboring country, focusing on the role of artificial intelligence on society and the economy. Similar themes in discussion, not so much about the art, but one of the things I quoted there is a poem called Die Gedanken sind frei. Okay, if you don't know it, read it. It's an interesting poem, and so being a pessimist is the first step towards becoming an optimist. As long as you have the capacity and the courage, humility, and imagination to think beyond the box, to figure out the solutions. And I will close with this. What I do daily, what I really focus on is innovation and entrepreneurship. And there is a profit motive in there, but there's also very much more, I think, a creative force, which is very much about artistic endeavor. How to look at a problem and figure out a solution that is both financially but socially and environmentally sustainable. This is what I work with young people like yourself on, and they are artists in their own right. And in that sense, in Athens, during the crisis, many neighborhoods became very desolate. They became almost dead, or even worse, occupied by, let's say, antisocial, counterproductive circumstances. And what happened with Airbnb is a true renaissance. There are negative side effects when you have this in excess, but there's been a true amazing transformation. I give you this as an example where a creative force can actually make a positive difference.
Actually, we are about
Afterwards.
to end, so it would be more in an informal context to continue to discuss. David, would you like to answer the 2 points and questions that we heard?
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, I think this was also something referring to the discussion here. I don't think we should aim for perfect systems. I think we should go for learning systems. And in that sense, only a non-perfect system is a learning system. Yes, I think this, of course, is something very, very much with a practical value. Hopefully, we didn't have here now a certain split or polarization where the presentators on the podium were optimists and the audience was more pessimistic. Let's just think this was, so to say, something like a more random distribution. Now, with the role of the arts, I think this is very much a question. We could have whole lectures about this. When I came to the Angewandte about 12 or 13 years ago, at the beginning, I was asking this so-called naive question to the experts at the Angewandte, well, what are the arts? This was, so to say, a complex question. I don't know if the answers I got in that sense were convincing, or if the question as such was so good to phrase. But I think 2 elements with the arts I think are very fascinating. So the one is the art as a strategy. I think this is in fact something very, very important, which is I think also undervalued by many actors in a society, politicians, etc. Because art as a strategy to realize or to support the achievement of certain goals is very important, if it is ecological issues, etc. And I think another thing which also has fascinated me very much is the so-called artistic research, because I think if you come more from a scientific university or the field of scientific research, I think also scientific research should appreciate artistic research as something very important, actually expanding the scope or horizon of how research can be done, carried out, etc. Yes? So in that sense, I think the arts actually are very, very important allies in the sense of trying to go for a better future. Maybe to add a last comment, since I studied political science, I mean, populism, of course, is a big problem. Right-wing populism also is a very big problem. But I believe finally democracy is going to prevail. Yes, it will not be stopped by these developments and phenomena, and in that sense, of course, we have to combine all our creativenesses and courage, actually trying to move on, not in the sense that no statistical reports would make us optimistic, but that we should want to believe that actually ideas have a power to change something. Yeah? So even if the statistics would speak against something, still to say, well, let us continue the projects of progress and hopefully to plant out those ideas. And I'd like very much to close it, a quote by Margaret Mead, which I do not know literally, but the meaning of the quote is, "Do never underestimate what a small group of people can achieve, because if there ever has been a change, it has started actually that a small group of persons have come together wanting to go for something, which then something like a snowball effect actually had the potential to pursue." Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. So now the last reaction will be from Gerald Bast.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you mentioned the 1960s and what happened there, and I can tell you, if there were not these movements, political movements in the 1960s, I would not been able to sit here. If we had not the opportunity to expand, dramatically expand, the educational system, the university system, in that time, with the political movement of that time, I would not have the opportunity, would not have had the opportunity to study at the university. And I have a lot of friends who do say the same. So we had a dramatic expansion of the system from some 50,000 students in Austria up to now some 300,000. And this will not be the end. So what I say, and this is the discussion I'm doing with politicians and media, it won't be enough to have 30 or 35% of people with kind of a tertiary degree. In 20 years, we will need some 80% of people educated at some tertiary level. But they will have a totally different degree and totally different university education, as I mentioned. So what is the alternative not to go in this direction? If we look at what happened in technology, in society, in climate change, although this climate change is a rather a euphemistic term, I'd rather would, even today we all realize this, it's a kind of a climate catastrophe and crisis. If we look at what is happening in the traditional economy, in the labor situation, if we know that in the next 20 years, up to 50% of what we now see as jobs will disappear, and may it be not 50%, may it be 30 or 25%, what will happen if we lose 25% of the now existing jobs? The alternative will be a gated community for the rich and those who have jobs and the ability to live, and the big rest will suffer. And there are books, very intelligent and dystopic books, who describe what will happen then. We will be very near to a kind of a civil war all over Europe, and not only in Europe, in the US, the same. If we realize that millions of people will be affected from climate crisis globally, you just have to look at the maps, global maps. Look at where are the regions with the highest population density. Where are the regions with the highest population growth? And where are the regions which are most affected by climate change and climate crisis? These are almost the same, the identical regions. And you don't need to be a politician or a political scientist to know what is happening. This is civilization. The human civilization is a history of migration. And here I'm coming back to my being an optimist. If nature has the chance to decide for disaster or changing the way, nature always is deciding for changing the way to survive. But this will not be a linear move of developments we already know. The Neanderthal man disappeared, although the Neanderthal was much stronger, much bigger than the Homo sapiens. And in a battle from man to man, the Homo sapiens totally would lose. And the Homo sapiens nevertheless won because he developed the opportunity to work together. What you mentioned on social intelligence, this was the big invention of Homo sapiens. And so I believe in some kind of new social intelligence, because we have so many dangers, so many threats. And in these kinds of threats, we will be able to survive. I think we have a lot of people who think like that in a different way. In a different way of politics, in a different way of education, and in a different way of social life. If we don't do this, and if we don't do this quickly, we will disappear, as we know now. But this won't happen. This is not the kind of the rule of evolution. And we are a product of evolution. So this is my optimistic view I give to you. And you're right. We need to have people asking questions like you did. And this is the motor, the fuel for the motor of human evolution towards a better way of living.
Do you want to respond on the arts question too?
Well, the art is one part of it. What I said, we only will be able to go this different way if we have as many people as possible, and there I don't talk about an elite, as many people in our societies as possible who are able to think out of the box, who are able to think in terms of contradictions, in terms of paradoxes, in terms of contextualizations which are not usual. We need people who are able to think in a different way. They learned from their parents and they learned from their teachers. And this is the way we are doing here. So if you look around, what you can see here, these are the abilities and skills which are needed for the future of our societies. So again, I'm an optimist, and part of this optimism is that there are people and institutions like the Angewandte who are going in this direction. And we are becoming more and more.
Thank you very much. There couldn't be better closing words, of course. We will continue with the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. And if you want to go further, if you want to hear more, if you want to read more, in autumn, the book on the future of work and education will come out. We will present it at the University of Applied Arts, so stay tuned and have a very good and hot afternoon here at the festival.